invite Dr. Thiaga Rajan to give us what we've all been waiting for, our commencement lecture today, My Idea of India.
Good morning to all of you. The respected Vice Chancellor, Dr. Rajkumar, the Dean, Dr. Sudarshan, the Registrar, Professor D.S. Patnaik, Professor Kaveri, all of you students, and I'm particularly happy to hear that many of you are incoming first-year students, and other distinguished guests in the audience. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with you and answer a few questions today. I must say that I should start with the Vice Chancellor's vision, which I completely second the Dean's notion of truly inspiring story. You know, when I'm often asked about my career, I say I had some idea of a destination based on my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather. I was going to end up doing public service in South India. So I chose the most interesting and winding and educational path to get there. The Vice Chancellor is the exact opposite of that. A man with an independent vision who was able to develop it and get it into action and scale it with the support of the Chancellor to something of this scale. So first I applaud him for his efforts and his initiative. Even more important, I was impressed that he took the time today to talk about who are we, what are our values, why are we here. What distinguishes institutions of excellence from others is a consistency of culture and the propagation or the permanence of that culture over time, even though people come and go. Now, students by nature come and go, so that's not unusual. But even faculty, nobody lasts forever. So if you look at the great institutions, part of their mythology, part of their unique kind of position is the culture that they have developed. And having such a commencement session where he gets to talk about the past, talk about the values, talk about what should be the ideal way that you can benefit from this, I think is a wonderful innovation that I have not seen in too many Indian universities at least. So again, I commend him for that. I think the Dean gave me a good opening for what I was going to otherwise talk about anyway. But since so many of you are so young, I myself was born 20 years after independence. Many of you were born 50, 60 years after independence. So maybe you don't think about this too much. But we must first start with the idea of India. There is something that is common to all of us, though I am the first guy to say that diversity is very important. The notion that you could carve out a country from a region that had been variously ruled by various conquerors, kings, locals, we take my part of the world, over different eras we had the Pandyas, the Cheras, the Cholas, the Pallavas, the Vijayanagaram Nayaks, the Muslim invaders. Different people ruled the country and had different kinds of models of governance over the decades, over the centuries. In fact, if you take my city of Madurai, it's probably one of the oldest living cities, 2,500, 3,000 years old. Clearly, over that time, it's a wide range of people, of models of governance, of religions, of dominations. And yet, this place, which there are 50 or 60 variants of this across this country, one day in 1947, after a lot of political back and forth about where should be the borders, what should be the country, neither exclusively based on some kind of racial makeup, nor exclusively based on a language makeup, because Bengali is spoken in West Bengal, also in Bangladesh. Urdu is spoken in parts of North India, also in Pakistan. This constitutional entity, and at that time we didn't even have a constitution, we had a notion in 1947 that we were going to be an independent country. And in some ways, I say at the beginning that the idea of India itself is a wonder, it's a miracle. The fact that we were able to create and sustain a geographically designed or designated by colonial powers to some extent nation that had thousands of years of previous history of great variance, a racial melting pot of various people who had come and gone, and that it is sustained for 75 years in itself, I think, is a wonder and a miracle that we all share in. In fact, if you look, the formation was not easy, right? Independence was August 1947, many of you may know. It took over 2 years to draft the Constitution. The Constituent Assembly had many debates. Constitution was drafted, adopted in November 1949, put into effect on Republic Day, the first Republic Day, January 26, 1950. At the time, there were about 565 to 70 princely states and 17 provinces as ruled by the British in their time. Over the last 75 years, we have gone to various organizational and administrative divisions, starting with the 1956 reorganization of states into 14 states and 7 union territories, today to 28 states and 9 union territories after the split of J&K. So what makes a country? The Dean asked this question. Is it a constitution? If it is a constitution, how about the UK that has no written constitution? How about relative stability in constitutions? The US is 200 plus years old, has had 27 amendments to its constitution in 200 plus years. We are 75 years old. We have had 127 amendment bills, of which 105 of them have been voted, approved, implemented. If the constitution itself is fluid, then what defines India? What is India? Again, the Dean talked of the basic structure doctrine or the fundamental rights case, which many of you in this school will sooner or later come across, the Kesavananda Bharati versus the state of Kerala case. And though it is now under threat, at some level it set the framework. It says some things in the constitution can never be changed, no matter how many of you vote for it and how many states pass it. Now, for all these strengths in our constitution, we have some inherent weaknesses. The first weakness is that by necessity, this was a top-down design constitution. They were trying to carve out a precarious concept of a nation in what was hundreds of princely states and other provinces across great differences in language, culture, history, racial makeup, etc. And so by necessity, though the constitution says that India is a union of states, in effect, it is very much centrally controlled. It is very much a country looking top down. In fact, the greatest evidence of that is that there was no notion of a third tier of government. There was no notion of a panchayat or a corporation or a municipality or a local body till the 1990s Panchayati Raj Act. So we have evolved a lot. In some ways, I would say, much better than expected, much better than the odds would have predicted. At least the idea of India as a country, as an integrated nation, as one player in the global political and geopolitical and macroeconomic spectrum, I think the fact that that is now beyond doubt, beyond question, is an unquestionable success. On the other hand, I would say there are a lot of things we need to really work on. At the heart of it, I'm going to talk about 3 things. 1, the extent of inequality and how that is damaging to the notion of both democracy and nationhood. 2, a profound decline in the structural design of how our country ought to function, how the parts ought to fit, how people should be held accountable, whose role is what. And finally, and in my opinion, a consequence of the first 2, a decline in general public values and morality, and what are some things we can do to improve that. So those basic 3 topics I will touch on today. For me, at the heart of democracy is the notion of equality. Equality of access, a level playing field, transparency in information if you're in the capital markets. Equality is at the core of democracy, and the notion of equality is what binds a free market and democracy together. This is a very, very universal notion. Some of you may have read my introduction that was printed, which I saw, where I have commented, or somebody has commented, that I, having traveled to many parts of the world, I am struck both by the difference of cultural practices but also about the universality of human values. I want to talk about the notion of equality as a universal human value, and I want to talk with specific examples how that translates across cultures, across countries, across time. And though it is a profound value, how difficult it is to attain, at least in the case of the United States, which is, as I say, 200 plus year old country or 250 plus year old country. In the US Constitution, adopted 1789, the preamble says that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, on the face of it, this was a pioneering document at the time. But in reality, there's already two problems here. The first problem is it only talks about men. It doesn't talk about women. The second is, while this was being declared as the Constitution, active slavery was still in practice in the United States. Now you take that to Europe, and about 10 years later, partially influenced or invigorated by the American experience, there was a big revolution in France. And the cry for liberty, equality, fraternity was the basis on which the revolution ran. Notice the commonality of equality as one of the core concepts of this. We fast forward to, in our part of the country, in 1916, a movement called the Dravidian movement started with something called the Justice Party. My ancestors were involved in it. My grandfather was the president at some time. And in 1929, the convergence of the social justice movement led by the Justice Party and the self-respect movement led by Periyar or EVR came together in a major conference in 1929, February 17th in Chengalpattu. This is one of the legendary conferences for people like us who are of the social justice or the Dravidian framework. My grandfather had the great honor of raising the flag and opening the conference, and I read from his speech. 1929, okay. The aim and objective of this movement, of the self-respect movement, is to annihilate that social construct which discriminates between two human beings, creates divisions between different sections of society, indoctrinates the concept of superiority and inferiority on the basis of birth, paves way for the majority of people to be treated worse than cattle, prevents the majority of all believers from even entering the temples, and allows for women to be treated as household utensils. This is the problem with society, 1929. And he says the aim and objective of this movement, therefore, is as follows: to ensure everybody is given equal rights, to create equality between the sexes on the principles of both natural justice and man-made laws, to create all requisite facilities for every single person to attain complete and wholesome development, to make all the people realize their duties towards the nation and learn of the rights which they enjoy in the nation, and to cultivate the feeling of unity and solidarity among all the peoples through nationalist goals and beliefs which will enable them to experience joy and sorrow with equanimity. See the consistency of thread. This is 130 years after the French Revolution, 140 years after the US Constitution. Next we go to the document that we all talk about, our Constitution of India. And I read from the preamble. We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic and to secure for all its citizens justice first. That's the added component relative to the French. Justice, social, economic, and political. Then the same things: liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. So here we are, another 20 years after the Self-Respect Conference, and 150, 160 years after the US Constitution. And in fact, Dr. Ambedkar, who, as you know, was the leading light of the Constituent Assembly, he goes on to explain the problem of inequality. And he says, to leave inequality between class and class, between sex and sex, which is the soul of Hindu society, and to go on passing legislation relating to economic problems is to make a farce of the constitution and to build a palace on a dung heap. So, in every way, the universality of human values, I say again and again, starts with equality, with self-respect, with the identity that all of us are born equal, irrespective of gender, of caste, of community. If you get that right, a lot of things come well from that. And it's very hard to get that right, because here we are in the same country. 1879, the Constitution says all men are born equal, doesn't say anything about women, doesn't say anything about slaves. And 180 something years later, in 1963, after our Constitution, after our Republic, this is the speech, the famous speech of Martin Luther King, the civil rights activist. And he says in August 1963, he is still only dreaming of this. He hasn't realized it. He says, I have a dream. Talks about many aspects of that dream. Then he says, I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by their character. So, though it is a universal concept, and though it is, transcending time, culture, race, region, at some level, it is very difficult to attain, and getting it right, in my opinion, is the core to improving a democracy. Let's take various examples within India. In Tamil Nadu, we have much better development and much better equality than we have in the Indian average. That's mathematical. I'm not making a political statement. Per capita income is over 3 lakh rupees. 52% of our college-age children enroll in college. 89+% of our 18-year-old girls have passed out of +2. 40% of all women in manufacturing jobs in India are in Tamil Nadu alone, though we're only 6% of the population. How did we get this far ahead? Because in 1921, the Justice Party legislated compulsory elementary education for boys and girls. They legislated what they call the communal geo to make sure that all communities had a ratio in which they had access to jobs. This is the basis. They legislated women the right to vote before it was done anywhere else. In fact, before it was done in the UK. So you start with equality as the basis, and then the formula becomes very, very clear. If you do not get the 50% of the population in most developed places who are women, if you do not get them equal opportunity, equal rights, equal engagement in the economy, you cannot have either an equal society or a prosperous society. Everything starts there. If you do that right, then you say the next thing is to make sure that the next generation is better fed, better educated than the last one. You start with children. And you get that right, then you make sure that every extra dollar goes into primary education, then secondary education, then skill development, so forth. So the core to actually fixing our democracy is to focus on human capital development and the policies that drive human capital development, which, as I say, starts with self-respect, equality, access, education, support from the state for health, for progress. If we get that right, I think within India we have clear data. Even if you compare a state like Gujarat, which is per capita income wise roughly the same as Tamil Nadu, maybe even slightly higher. But 50% of the girls at age of 18 have not finished high school. Now there's a whole bunch of policy issues there that you should go and look into. Why is that the case? Why are they not finishing high school? It's because they're not coming to high school. Why are they not coming to high school? Because they're not being given proper menstrual health support. Why are they not given? Because of the social mores, etc. So it takes a generation or two to actually progress and drive change. But the core of it is, if you don't get everybody involved and if you don't lift the weighted average productivity at the bottom of the pyramid, there is no stable society, therefore there is no full democracy, therefore there is no clear growth. If you look around the world, the correlation between relatively equal societies and relatively high standards of life is very, very clear. You take a Scandinavia, you take a Western Europe, you take Australia, You take even a Singapore, take a Canada, it's very clear. Those societies where everybody has access, everybody has engagement, and the bottom of the pyramid is protected, you will find better growth, better quality of life, better economies, better development. If that's the first major issue, the second to me is structural reform of the way our democracy functions, the way our constitution intended it to function. In fact, if you look at how the system works today, I would say, having been a legislator elected twice, the role of the legislature in the design of our democracy, which is very similar to the British parliamentary model, is effectively neutered. That's a very strong word, is effectively neutered. When was the last time that any legislature, either state or union, was able to create an impact on the design of a bill, the allocation of money, or some other profound policy? Through things like the Anti-Defection Act, we have ended up empowering party leadership and disenfranchising the elected representatives. Maybe there's still some democracy in the local bodies, where many of them are run without a political symbol in the election. But if you come to the higher levels of government, we have serious problems, starting with the absence of the role of the legislature as a check and balance, the erasure, completely erasure of the lines of separation between the judiciary, the administration, and the legislature. Every single day when I was a minister for the personnel department, I would see judgments which, in my opinion, the judiciary far exceeded their role. In fact, one of them is being argued in the Supreme Court today. I happened to be on the flight yesterday with the secretary of the department, and we are arguing it as SLP in the Supreme Court today, where we feel the judiciary ought to stay within the bounds of, is it legal, is it constitutional, is it fair, does it violate anybody's fundamental rights, and not get into, this person shall be paid this money and appointed on that day, and this should be given, and then based on that a class will develop, and then like 50 other people will come. This was a constitutional mandate given to the administration, which is the majority of the elected members. We have decaying institutions. It is very clear, the more you have independent, self-sufficient institutions, courts, reserve banks, election commissions, regulatory authorities, the more those function independent of political pressure, you're going to find that you'll have better democracy, better outcome. Everybody's better off. I ran into a senior IAS officer who was then at the BRICS Bank at the AIIB. He had served with the current Prime Minister in Gujarat. And he told me, we got a lot of things done, and we realized that our mantra for getting things done was that you need political will and administrative skill. Those are profound words. Political will means that those who are elected should care more about the long-term outcomes and the consequences for their children than about the next vote. That's what the political will is. Or have the confidence that they can explain to the people why what has been done is in the greater interest of society and their children and their children's children. And then you need administrative skill. Now, the Dean already touched upon this, so I don't want to go too far in detail, but we are woefully lacking administrative skill. There is no design. Like, if I was to look at this as a corporate executive like I used to be, the fundamental design of government is not intended to create administrative skill. Nobody is permanent. Everybody comes and goes. Every IAS officer rotates 2 or 3 years. All the people below don't have access. We don't have institutional memory. There are not computerized systems that track across regimes, across individuals. Very often, political regime change means policy change. So in every way, these kinds of things have turned out to be much worse than we would have expected. But I think there's very clear paths we can take. The first is greater devolution of powers. There's no other country in the world where we have so much decision making concentrated in one place in Delhi. In communist China and in capitalist America, states, cities, counties have greatly higher powers than we have in India. The police are run by the city. Industrial permits are given by the city in Shanghai. In my county where I used to live in the United States, alcohol policy, sales tax set by the county, by the district, income taxes collected by the states, collected by the cities. You have great devolution. Devolution gives you something profound. Particularly in the case of India, devolution gives you something profound. The larger the electorate, the less accountability there is for the elected official. If I'm an MP for 1.5 to 2 million people, almost nobody can hold me accountable for anything. The scale is just wrong. If I'm the councillor for 8,000 or 10,000 people in my city council, I better be answerable to them because they know where I live. They all live in the next 4 or 5 streets, and if they don't get water and the garbage is not picked up, they'll make my life miserable. That's what devolution does. The more you move power down to the people, the more you're likely to get a check and balance and accountability. And unfortunately, from things like the CAG process to disciplinary actions within the government, all these have greatly decayed. There has been a general kind of slide to the bottom, which I'm going to get to as my third major point. How do we restore the values? Where we now have all the intended designs that were given in the Constitution don't actually function the way they are supposed to. We get CAG audit reports 2 years or 3 years after the account year ends, by which time all the offices have changed, likely the government has changed, and therefore the accountability is not there at all. I served 5 years on the Public Accounts Committee of the Tamil Nadu Assembly, and I was seeing paras going back to, audit paras going back to the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. Effectively, if you don't have a timely resolution, you may as well not write these up at all. It means nothing. Because what it does, if you write them up and nothing happens, it tells everybody the system is broken and there are no consequences for being written up. And then it just encourages everybody to do whatever they want. But the things that we can do, as the Dean said, policy must take into account second order, third order effects of decision making. It must consider the past. It must consider what are the variables that are likely to drive the outcome beyond a political decision. We must have data. The more data we have, the more informed decisions we can make. Anyway, we're going to operate in a gray area. If we try our best, we'll have enough data to make halfway decent decisions. If we look the other way because the data doesn't suit us, then we get what we get now, which is a lot of ill-informed decisions without enough information. Technology can be a great enabler. I'm now the Minister for IT and Digital Services. I'm very excited. I've just returned from a trip to Hyderabad, where my friend Ram, the IT Minister KTR, has shown tremendous examples using technology to take out the intermediaries, to put all the documents online, to put licenses, registrations, insurance online, so nobody can hold you up on the street and demand a bribe. You just show your phone has all the documents. Or to do land records, registration online. Don't have to worry about paying somebody to get a title deed transferred. There are so many ways. In Tamil Nadu, we have made almost all services e-services now. And soon we will bring a right to services bill where within a certain number of days, if you apply for a death certificate, legal certificate, and it doesn't get done, it's deemed done. Telangana, they already have that. So you can use technology to actually improve the accountability of government employees and public servants and to deliver timely services to the people and increase the quality of our democracy. But overall, I would say that we have a general decline in the nature of the political discourse. We talk a lot about hypothetical things. We talk very little about actual outcomes. As a finance minister, I used to say, every budget gets tremendous attention and write up in all the papers. But a budget is only a statement of intent. It says what I intend to do in the next year. If you actually go and look at what we call the revised estimate, which is 9 months of real data and projection of 3 months forward, you'll find great variances to the intended budget. And then you go and look at the final account, which comes probably a year after the accounting year has ended, and you'll find there's almost no correlation. Huge amounts of variance. How many press or public look at the final account? Almost nobody. Everybody looks at the budget. So we say, oh, I'm going to do X, what a great government I am. Only a year and a half later, you'll know whether the government has actually done what it said it was going to do or not. So we need to get back to looking at actual outcomes rather than propaganda or projection of intent. Finally, I would say the thing that gives me the greatest cause for concern in my idea or my vision for a great India is a general decline in the norms and values in society. Now, I won't blame this on anybody else but the politicians, the bureaucrats, the people at the top of the structure, right? Because the system always rots from the head down like a fish. And it is because of a lot of problems in the top that we now have this going all the way to the bottom. I'll give you one example. When I was in MLA, I went to one of my constituency streets and I was inspecting the quality of the sewer or something. And people came to me and said, oh, look at all these vehicles parked. They're parked in such a way that they obstruct traffic, they reduce the flow. Why don't you do something about it? And I just went back and forth, came back and said, fine, I'll do something about it. But I also noticed that at least 50% of the houses have built ramps and driveways encroaching into the road beyond the end of their property. So were I to start taking action, I'll ask them to come and clear all of that. Are you okay with that? Oh, no, then it's okay. Then, so if I build, it's okay. But if somebody else parks, then the government should take it out, right? So this notion of free riders, those of you who study economics, that everybody else should follow the law and I'll be a free rider. I won't follow, but I'll get the benefit of the fact that society follows rules. This has become prevalent. This has become so widespread that we are suffering huge losses economically, socially, in efficiency, in productivity. I think we need to start from education. When I was a kid, we used to have to take 2 or 3 years of courses called civics. When I go to classrooms now, I don't see such courses anymore, right? None of my constituents understand what is the role of a city legislator, what is the role of a state legislator, what should I ask my MP for, which minister can do what. These kinds of things just don't penetrate. I think we lose as a society. It is our job as governments, much as we talk about education, we need to also inculcate in people what is a good human being, what is a citizen, what is a participant in the optimal outcome or the global good. What is it that you have to do your share to make the system perform at its peak. And I have seen many societies where they're slightly better. I would say we have examples around the world. If you look at places like Australia, for example, I find the general attitude is towards compliance, partly because the rules are clear, partly because the political system does not look to waive every violator of every rule. If you violate, they will take action on you. There's no then the MLA calling and saying, no, please let this guy off. No, but that guy is my friend. These kinds of things. I will end on 2 notes. I will say that whether it is for a politician, whether it is for a citizen, whether it is for authorities, officers, compassion and understanding of reality is crucial. And I think the more we have freedom of expression, the more we have vivid debates, the more we have 1,000 voices say 1,000 different things, and then we can all understand everybody else's point of view and come out with some collective decision, the better off we are. The more we go towards groupthink, the more there is such a thing as because X says so, it must be so. Or because Y says so, nobody can argue against it. Or because you say this doesn't make sense, you must be anti-national. The more we have these kinds of things, it is a retarding downward slide. It is not healthy for any society, for any college, for any university, for any democracy. And in particular, in India today, given what we know about the demographic profile, not just of India in its history, which is where we have the most number of young people that we have ever had, but also about India relative to the rest of the world. No other country of our scale has this many young people. In Africa maybe, but they are not of the economic scale or the global impact that we are. And therefore, I think it is crucial that we have very young people engaged in all public policy matters and debates. And that is the single best driver of change. Because around the world, across history, change is always driven by the young. They have the most to gain if things go better, and they have the most to lose if things don't go well. they realize it, particularly as we educate them. And what we need to do is find a way to give them a voice and get them engaged and not try to hold them back using experience or maturity as the basis of wisdom. So having said that, and I think I've slightly exceeded my time, let me say that for these reasons, I am so happy to be here today to have this interaction, because you in this school of public policy, in this university, you represent those best placed to have a major impact on these three topics that I've talked about, and therefore that I think you will have the opportunity to shape our country's future. I want to once again thank the Chancellor, who I had dinner with yesterday, was very kind, hosted me, the Vice Chancellor, the Dean, the faculty, and most of all of you for this opportunity. I wish you all the best for your time at the university here and in the years after you graduate. This is a very exciting and important phase of your life for many of you. I think it will be the first time you've lived away from your families and started to develop your own network of friends, a social circle. So I encourage you to make the most of it. I certainly know from the Vice Chancellor's comments that the university is designed for you to do that. I hope you'll make the best of it. I wish all of you very good luck, and I thank you once again.
I said that thank you so much, Dr. Thiaga Rajan, for a fascinating and a comprehensive tour de force on the evolution of the idea of India and its great contemporary significance. We'll quickly move into a Q&A session. So, students, please shoot your question.
In 2023, it was reported that around 1.2 billion people have access to internet. So, and you also mentioned that we should build a people's government, and currently, the banking system and all of that has been, been accessible due to digitalization. So I want to know, what about the voting system? Are we progressing towards a more digital voting system so that people have more access towards choosing their government and have more speech on what they prefer? And also, it will, according to me, I think it will increase our chance of having, putting across our opinions about the government. So I want to ask you about the digitalization in the voting system. My name is Anika. I'm doing BA Economics.
Thank you. It's a very good question. I'll answer very briefly three ways. Of course, we would like to have electronic access to everything. If I want you to get a driving license, I also want to allow you to vote. But there are many ways to achieve that, and we got a little bit of a roadblock, the first step. Even for things like banking or applying for government services, even in a state like Tamil Nadu, we only have about 80% penetration of the internet. We're trying our best now. In my new department, we have a project partly sponsored by the Union government. Kerala has done slightly better than us. I was supposed to be in Kerala the day after, but the Chief Minister asked me to come Monday. We're going to go see this KFON model where they've actually laid fiber to every village. So I would say in today's world, access to the internet is almost a fundamental right, because there's so much information available, not just internet, but high-speed internet for video and on demand, right? So we are not quite there on the infrastructure yet, but when we are, definitely we'll get there. But there's also a third answer, which is that there's other ways to make sure everybody participates, right? Like in countries like Australia, in some of the Scandinavian countries, it's compulsory voting. If you don't vote, you lose your benefits, you get a fine, there's consequences for it. So I agree with you, the greater the participation in the democracy, the better off we are. We should facilitate it every way possible. In an ideal world, it could be electronic. But even today, we already have a divide on who has access, who doesn't. So I wouldn't want to use that as the basis for voting yet, one day.
I'm Abhilasha. I'm a final year economics student. And firstly, thank you, sir, for delivering this remarkable speech. It was a delight hearing you. And you touched upon the importance of education and enrollment in education. So my question is, so recently Dean Sudarshan had shared an article with us about the possible oversupply of educated individuals in Tamil Nadu specifically, and how the manufacturing sector is finding it difficult to find blue-collar workers. So my question to you is, how do we create enough jobs for these educated individuals that we are churning out?
Yeah, Tamil Nadu is a very unique situation. I was saying this even yesterday to the Chancellor. Usually you see markets that have too much supply and too little demand, or too much demand and too little supply. In Tamil Nadu, it's true in other places, but in Tamil Nadu in particular, because that's our daily concern, we have a lot of educated people with qualifications on paper who don't have jobs, and we have a lot of jobs that don't have any people with the right qualification. Now that's usually what we would call information inefficiency, meaning the demands of the market are not being transmitted properly to the people who are selecting what they want to study. It's the simplest explanation. There may be many other variables. But it's wrapped up in 2 or 3 things in the case of Tamil Nadu. The first is that we have such a huge surge in the number of people going into education, both high school and undergraduate, that there is no proper guide system, right? Like I'm 57. When I went to engineering college at then REC, now NIT Trichy, the state of Tamil Nadu produced 3,000 something engineers a year. Now it produces some 200,000 engineers a year. This scale is unprecedented. There's not enough people to mentor them. There's not even people to teach them, if you ask me. Not all engineering colleges are getting actually good engineers out. And so back in my maiden speech in the assembly 7 years ago, I brought this up and I said in most advanced societies you have something like a Bureau of Labor Statistics, you have an Economic Development Board, you have other transmission mechanisms of finding out the information. What do jobs pay? How much is needed? How many plumbers will be needed? What does it pay to be a pressure pump enabled hydraulic guy 5 years in, 7, and transmit that back to the decision makers, which is often not the students but their parents. And so they can make these informed choices instead of just following the herd. So I would say the bad news is in Tamil Nadu we have a lot of skilling gap to close, and the CM has made that his focus and we're working towards that. We've set up a skill development corporation. We have this program called Nan Mudalvan. We're tying up with a lot of foreign countries and states to get their certification requirements, bring it here and use those to train our people to meet those certification requirements. Some of them will do the work from here, some of them will go there and do the work. But the good news is we have people that have got, we have a large number of people that have got the base education that can be shaped into these jobs. So the gap between like what we have and what is needed is smaller than if they were never in school in the first place, right? So there's some advantages, but it's essentially a breakdown in the system. And where I lived in the US for 20 years, I'd say one of the greatest assets of the US economy is the connectivity between the real economy and the academic institutions. At least used to be. Now it's a bit different, but back in the days, because the universities would adapt their courses and their curriculum to match what the economy was going to be pulling out, because such a tight connect between the universities and the corporate institutions. But those are the steps we have to take to fix that.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for the address. I am Akhil Menon, currently final year student of Masters in Public Policy course. I had 2 questions, short ones. So most of your talk revolved around equality as being a universal theme. So recently I've come across one of Bamsev's video when he talks about, where the leader is talking about reservation for all, proportional reservation. What your population, you get the reservation for that. So what are your thoughts on that? And secondly, you talked about devolution of power to the third tier of government. I feel devolution of political power has to be followed or preceded by economic devolution of power. And do you think things like GST, the bill GST, has actually killed any further devolution of power? So these are my 2 questions.
The first one is easy. I mean, in 1921, what I told you the Justice Party government enacted was called the communal geo. And it said exactly that. If your community is 8% of the population, you get 8% of the jobs. And that's been the rule in Tamil Nadu since 1921. So that has certainly helped us, I think. I'm not saying 100% of it is great. In fact, I'll go one step further. Of course, if you introduce reservations suddenly one day, you're going to have an inefficient outcome, because suddenly you're going to find those who had greater access to education, therefore greater skills, will find the number of jobs restricted and won't go on. So today it's inefficient. Everybody understands that, everybody accepts that. The question is, if you do it right for one generation or 20 or 30 years, in every community, in every village, you will create forerunners. You will create, somebody from here is a collector, somebody from there is a doctor. And what that does, it builds the pipeline. So though we don't think about it consciously, we think, our families, there's a natural way of life. It is so important to have a guide, a forerunner, a mentor, an example, whom you can connect to or at least emulate in your head. In fact, I'll give you the extreme example. When we used to go recruiting, when I was a banker on Wall Street, they will only send MIT graduates to MIT to recruit, only Harvard graduates to Harvard. Because the same recruiting line we'd give, we'd say, one day I was sitting in your seat. The implication is, tomorrow you can be in my stand, right? So the connectivity is so important. So reservations in the long term give you great outcomes. In the short term, they'll be inefficient. Going to GST, I was a member of the council for 2 years, and at least in my opening remarks when I joined, I was very, I don't know what the word is, maybe not aggressive, very blunt in my statement about the limitations of GST. Of course, as a principle, GST has greatly reduced the independence, the economic independence of states. But, this is a long drawn process. A lot of the stuff is out there, so I won't bore you with it, but I'll go the positive. After we came to power, the 6th State Finance Commission report had not been ready because of COVID. We extended their term for a year when I was finance minister. We gave them a lot more input. And we have increased the devolution grant from the state to the local bodies significantly in the 6th State Finance Commission. More than that, when I was finance minister, I put in the system with the chief minister's guidance that instead of sending these monies to the Department of Rural Development or Department of Municipal Administration, then they would then decide when to send it to Madurai Corporation and Coimbatore Corporation and this Panchayat. We would directly transfer the funds out so that there's no another layer of kind of administrative and there's again some serious questions about why that was the case and so forth. But GST and GST is the rule, the law, the system. I'm not an anarchist. I don't want to break it down and leave it but if you ask me, it is flawed in conception, it is even more flawed in design, and it is exceptionally flawed in execution. We could actually execute much better with the existing law, and then we need to change the law a bit. And then we could ask the question, I've just, tomorrow the GST is meeting, council is meeting about implementing the betting gambling, rate. When I was a member of the GM, I asked the question, if these games are regulated by the state, casinos, horse racing, lotteries, online gaming, if they are state subjects regulated by the state, why do I need a universal tax? Right? Some states can choose to have lotteries and tax them. Some states can choose to have horse racing and not tax them. It's up to them, right? Alcohol is taxed by the state, or marginally by the center, but some of the subjects retained by the states after GST include things like petrol, diesel, alcohol, etc. Shouldn't these have been, because how many race courses do you know that cross state lines? It's within my state, right? Let me regulate my state, let me tax my state, and let me get on with it. So these are all, profound questions. Of course, there's not that many takers for profound change in politics, right? It's very, very rare to find. So.
So a lot of your session was along the lines of inclusivity in education and how we have to get broader access to education. But in current society where there's such a huge disparity in social capital between upper caste and lower caste members, how do you actually reach out and get them this quality education that you were talking about? Even when somebody, when we were talking about Jindal or any other private university has access and is looking to build towards something like inclusivity and getting education to all these people, how do you actually do that? Because you can claim to be inclusive, you can claim to put all these all these methods in place to get access to people of let's say lower class into these institutions, but there's still an issue of visibility. Most of the people here, whether whichever state they're from, are people who had an inherent privilege in being able to access or in being able to know about these structures that were in place that a lot of people from the lower class don't have. So how do you solve that issue of visibility, and how do you solve that issue of getting quality education to these people?
Thank you. Let's take two more questions. Yeah, please go ahead.
since 1992 we have this Municipal Corporation and Municipality Act in place, and we do have mayors for cities and everything, right? And in the lecture also you mentioned that there are some cities in foreign countries where the city controls the police and everything. So what are the recommendation for you from your end to the current existing system of municipalities in India? As in, like, are you suggesting that we need an alternative model for this, or we can do some rectification and we can like make the mayors more empowered in terms of handling the cities better than the existing one? And the second thing is, you also talked about like that there are the few policies take more than a political tenure of a government to show the results with like to their intentions, right? So you said that sometimes by the time the results come, the governments gets changed. So there comes a difference between the government and governance, because governance is a continuous process, whereas government is a temporary process. So you being at that legislative position, what are your ways of ensuring that policies that are beneficial for the national growth as well as for the state growth are continued irrespective of political parties?
Last question.
So my question is regarding India being one of the leading economies globally, yet, thank you so much, yet the control that India as a state holds in terms of vis-a-vis internal security when comparing it to its peers of similar size, whether GDP or population, we find certain disconnect in it. So I would like to know your opinions on it, like whether is it a public policy matter or is it just execution on a scale and lack of state capacity in that regard?
So during your tenure as a finance minister, you have taken eminent economists like Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee and even Raghuram J. Rajan on the board for economic counseling, and you have even recruited BCG for making Tamil Nadu a $1 trillion economy. So if the answer is yes and these people are giving effective results, is it a lack of the state government or the central government in putting out better officers who could have done this work? And do we really need to rely on these foreign consulting companies and groups to give a better result?
I'll take the easy one first. There are no foreign consulting companies, right? BCG Chennai won the contract. So, if the BCG has a good Chennai operation, it's a tender. I don't get to decide. We put it to a bid, and whoever gives the best proposal at the lowest price wins we pre-qualify them and they bid. But I would say the first sign of anybody who is really competent is to understand the scale of the problem is so large that you must get as much input as you can. I've already told you that administrative skill is in very, very short supply in my experience in government. And that's across all parties, all governments. I'm not talking politically. I'm saying that political will may be even rarer than that, but that's a different story. Those of you who watch series like Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister and all that, you have many examples of that. But getting advice from people is crucial in my opinion. When I was finance minister, at least I delivered results. I delivered spectacular results in 2 years. I would attribute to the fact that I had advisory committees for everything. I had a bunch of eminent economists for that. I had a bunch of great lawyers to help me with litigation cases. I had a bunch of great federal fiscal policy specialists under the senior Supreme Court lawyer Arvind Datta to help me with GST. The amount of work that needs to be done by an individual as a minister for a state of 8 crore people and a $300 billion economy is so large that nobody can do a good job at it individually. There's just not bandwidth. The greater the number of people who are willing to help share that load for me, all these were pro bono. We didn't pay them. BCG bid, that's a different story. But, my friend Raghu or my friend Esther didn't get paid 1 rupee. They didn't even take travel. They paid their own travel and came. As did Mr. Datta. He makes enough money as a lawyer. He doesn't need money from the state. So these are all people, contributing. I would say that this notion of foreign and all that is like farcical, right? Every company is global now. Is Reliance an Indian company? A lot of their operations and their listings are overseas. Is Adani an Indian company? The CEO lives in Singapore. Mr. Adani, as best I can tell, is a Singapore PR. At least that's what he used to be when I was a banker at Stanchart. So I won't go too far into that. Let me take the other question, which is this question about continuity of policy across governments independent of elections. Actually, there are very good examples. Even in Tamil Nadu, no matter which party has come to power, the social justice agenda, the protecting the bottom of the pyramid, the expansion of nutritional support to children has been the same irrespective of who's in power. Justice Party started noon meal scheme in 1921. When the Congress Party through Kamaraj came, he expanded it to all government schools. There was only Chennai Corporation. When through MGR came, he said irrespective of means testing, all school children will get food. When through Kalangar, our CM came, he said not just food, but we're going to give them eggs. They need the protein. So this kind of continuity. Tamil Nadu, I think, has been spectacularly good at continuity of social justice policies and bottom of the pyramid support. I've just returned, as I say, from Hyderabad, where my friend KTR says Andhra, the erstwhile integrated Andhra, and now that part of it, which is Telangana, across all parties have been focused on the development agenda and the IT agenda without partisanship. They have, they maybe changed other policy. So different states have different examples. In an ideal world, across all governments, all good policy should continue, but it's not that barren that everybody changes things, right? At least some things have stayed the same. Your earlier question about devolution. Devolution, of course, we want to devolve the money first, right? What's the point of devolution of power compared to devolution of finances? So, for example, again, just a month ago, I was invited guest to Western Australia. One of the cities there run their own like innovation center, incubation center. They're like trying to do a cross-border trade with somebody. And after watching all of this, I said, how much of your budget do you generate as your own revenues and how much comes from the state or the federal government? It says 95% is their own revenues. Now, if you have 95% your own revenues, you can run an independent government basically. In India, because the tax structure is so skewed, all direct taxes and now the bulk of indirect taxes through GST are collected at the union, then some of it is sent to us, then some of it is sent to them. Then they need to depend on us, and therefore they are beholden. How much ever power politically I devolve, they don't have the money. So, of course, we must devolve the money first. And that's why I'm saying, I have argued before, direct taxation should be left to the states. In advanced countries like the US, direct taxation is left to the cities. The city of New York, the city of Los Angeles levy income taxes. Right? We don't have that far yet, but at least the state should be able to levy, because I have more people who can pay income tax. I want to take some of that. So I think devolution has to be economic first, and then through political power, right? Going back to the school question, right? So I think the first thing is to fund it properly. In Tamil Nadu, the highest allocation in the budget after pensions is to the school education department. We spend like 20,000 crores. In fact, I would like to say that there's issues beyond money, because we spend per student, I think something like 400 rupees less a year, like 32,000 or 33,000 rupees per student per year, 400 rupees less than the CBSE board Kendriya Vidyalayas do. And the Kendriya Vidyalayas, in my understanding, are producing much better results. So there's things beyond money. But I don't want to talk too much because I'm a sitting minister, I'll get in trouble. But I'll just tell you at a personal level, I'm an MLA. In my constituency, at a macro level, I focus a lot on the education of the poorest people, because that's really where you have to make the delta. As you say, the rich people get access anyway, it doesn't matter. So I have built in my 5 years as MLA through my constituency development funds, I've built 13 Anganwadis, right, like early daycare centers, and in the last 2 years, 6 more, 19. Every government school of mine, when I was an MLA, I started a library, I got them subscriptions to books, magazines, things like The Economist. I ran career counseling for the students, their parents. Now that I'm minister, I've had the great good fortune of a lot of companies coming to do CSR work. So we've got them all smart classrooms, we've got them like, high-tech labs now. I have a different company setting up in Madurai, a very innovative company called Pinnacle. They're going to set up a science center for government school students to come and learn. So we try to bridge the gap. The problem with education in the public sector, in my view, I say gently, I don't want to get too far, is not money. It's administration. Right? That's the big difference between public and private schools, at least in Tamil Nadu. It's not the money. In fact, we fund probably much higher than many private schools. So that, you have to make it a passion, and then you have to work. I can't control the things that are beyond me. As an MLA, I do it in my constituency. I make sure that every place has libraries, computers, subscriptions, career counseling. Now, tens of lakhs of rupees worth of smart classes, But back then, even better toilets, better classrooms. I've built classrooms in many schools. I've built toilets in many schools, in state schools, meaning government-run schools for the poor. And you try to improve any way you can, from individually to CSR to the government. And that's the only way, because there's no country in the world where you can eradicate the spectrum, right? If you go to the US, property taxes vary across neighborhoods. And so people want to move to a neighborhood where they pay slightly higher property taxes and get much better schools. So, this is a problem in free markets that you can't control 100% of. But, we try individually, and then as governments, we try and give it importance. And I would say in Tamil Nadu, we do, in some ways, better than most in things like funding, but maybe not so much in other ways. I don't want to say and self-incriminate myself.
Thank you, Dr. Thiaga Rajan.